What's good, homie G's Slizzle Slice? Sorry, you caught me at a bad time. I was just watching European food reviews. But you know what I love more than educating myself on natural protein supplements? My favorite video game, Dark Souls 3. Did you know that Dark Souls is a Metroidvania? You know what else is a Metroidvania? The gold standard of 2D platforming, Ori and the Will of the Wisps. What if I told you that instead of playing Dark Souls or Ori, you could play their incestuous love child? Long run backs, one-button combat, limited fast travel, half-baked systems, and blue. Why not play Hollow Knight? As you've no doubt heard several times from your local meth-addicted artsy girl, Hollow Knight is a 2D Souls-like Metroidvania set in feudal The Ground. You are a summer ant. Your purpose is to cull the lesser, non-verbal, ground-dwelling population. Why? Because they're beneath you, and their eyes are the wrong color. The player character is revealed to be male when, upon sighting a woman alone in the forest, your first instinct is to relentlessly stalk her until her fight-or-flight instincts kick in. This moderately European bug is horn-et and has inspired more Rule 34 than we as a species should feel comfortable with. When not occupied with inciting the next generation of formicophiliacs, she can be found assaulting the player and directing you to points of interest. Which brings us to my first point of contention, navigation. These are the Mantis Lords. After gaining the ability to wall jump, you are, I'm assuming, supposed to die once, give up, then backtrack to the City of Tears, which you'll now be able to reach. Here, you would meet the Nailsmith and upgrade your weapon before wandering over to this statue for a cutscene explaining the story. Only then returning to the Mantis Lords for a second attempt. But suppose you're not in a drooling, drug-induced coma and so defeat the Mantis Lords on your first attempt. You might start to have crazy ideas, like going through the door that opens when they die, finding the ticket for this tram, and then, for whatever reason, using it. To make a long story short, I took something of a detour, and by the time I upgraded my weapon, or even knew it could be upgraded, I had about 3 bosses left in my playthrough. When I eventually reached this statue, I'd progressed far enough that there was no cutscene. The noticeable lack of anti-establishment propaganda, meaning I could only wonder why I was turning every civilian into a civilian casualty. You might think this significant of a divergence could only be the result of severe head trauma, brain damage, if you will. But even if that were the case, I would still blame the charm system. Charms provide various bonuses, but require more charm slots to equip the stronger that bonus is, creating an interesting and player-tailored way to empower your character, or at least they would if you could actually equip them. Not only do you have very limited charm slots for the majority of the game, but several of them are probably already filled.
What's this? I said take only what you need to survive.
That is my GPS and 401k,
And I can't live without it!
This is the Compass Charm, wherein the developers remove the ability to see yourself on the map so that you have to buy and equip a charm to see yourself on the map. The Ledge Tax Evasion Charm automatically picks up coins which otherwise will phase through your grotesquely oversized deformity of a skull to maximize the odds of finding their way directly into a spike pit. Realistically, almost every player should have these equipped 24/7, each occupying 1 slot. And you start the game with 3, leaving an abundance of room for you to customize your build. At first, I refused to compromise on combat power, using neither the map charm nor auto-collection charm. Orienteering my way through dark underground labyrinths? Not that bad. Exchanging my life for pocket change? In the real world, that's called a job. But I just think it takes a special kind of sociopath to deprive players of basic necessities and then repeatedly force them to confront the question, is the in-game economical equivalent of a college student's bank account truly worth the 5 to 30 seconds of my actual, real, fleeting existence required to go and pick it up? Son of a... The same kind of sociopath that implements a quest to walk from one side of the map to the other while holding a delicate flower. So delicate that it breaks if you take any damage. Then, at the very end of that quest, puts this gap that you can obviously dash right over, except no you can't. The map is big, deceptively big, inconveniently big. If, like me, Ori was the only 2D Metroidvania you'd previously played, you might have believed that traversing the world is an enjoyable part of the experience. This is not the case, especially if you don't know where you're going. You don't move particularly fast, and if you take a wrong turn, having to backtrack only to find that the turn you missed was also the wrong way, the game can quickly start to feel stagnant. Combine this with the dark muted colors and soft ambient music, and you found yourself in an aspiring narcoleptic's wet dream. The game has fast travel, but until you've upgraded the magical mind-reading fast travel sword, you can only do so using public transportation, which is about as fun as using actual public transportation. However, it's not all bad. Despite what you might expect from a game set almost entirely underground, it's not 50 Shades of Cave. Some places are interesting. How is it raining underground? Canonically, I don't know, and I don't care, because it's aesthetically pleasing and fitting for the City of Tears. Also, remember in Elden Ring when you soypogged over an entire zone hidden behind a single wall? Well, it turns out Hollow Knight did it first, albeit on a smaller scale, but it's the concept that counts. When it comes to combat, the controls are clean, the movement is fluid, and this concludes my list of positive appraisals. If you can't kill an enemy by spamming horizontal attacks, you can probably kill them by spamming vertical ones. One-button spamming is by no means inherently bad. Some of my favorite games of all time have one-button spam. But in games like Sekiro or Ori, there's other things happening, like prosthetic tools or charged attacks, or using enemy projectiles as a springboard. In Hollow Knight, not so much. Many of its problems stem from the charm system. Even in the late game, you can't really combine builds because you barely have enough slots to fill out one. Not that it would be particularly interesting to do so, seeing as there's an entire 2 viable builds in the game, full magic and full melee. And in fact, if you know what you're doing, magic spam is easily the strongest build. But if it's your first time playing, you're probably not going to use it. For one thing, to make it viable, you'll need a lot of charm slots, which you probably won't have until you're at least most of the way through the game. Meaning even if you swapped to a magic build immediately, you'd only have it for a few bosses before beating the game. Then there's the fact that your magic resource is the same resource you use to heal. If you don't know what a boss does, you'll probably want to keep that resource for, healing. Especially seeing as if you start to heal and then get interrupted by attacks you're not familiar with, you won't get the heal, you'll take the damage, and you'll lose any of the resource spent while casting the heal. That said, magic shouldn't be the only option for build variety. Throughout Hollow Knight's map are hidden techniques known as nail arts, powerful alternative attacks which are charged up and then released. Weaving even one of these attacks into combat is a surefire way to drastically reduce your damage output while increasing damage received. The only way a nail art will increase your DPS is if you're charging them up during downtime. This means you're aware of when the downtime will be, not using that downtime to heal, and you're fine with consciously holding down an extra button while avoiding whatever's happening during the fight. I assumed that nail arts would be used for special enemy interactions, like breaking shields, or breaking ankles, or even just breaking posture. Instead, the vast majority of players will never realistically have a reason to use them, which, if nothing else, significantly simplifies the combat flowchart. When it comes to bosses, the majority are largely forgettable and extremely easy, which is probably for the best as the game practices ancient bad game design. In primitive times, it was believed that the more difficult you made your game, the more interesting that game would be, regardless of how that difficulty was actually implemented. Some tribesmen would give a boss more health, others would make its attacks hit harder, but the truly brilliant would move the checkpoint from directly next to the boss to the middle of fucking Africa. To this day, there are those who try to justify why this is a good thing, brainwashed by their obesity into believing that virtual cardio makes the game more challenging and adds to the experience. And so it's important to remind ourselves that holding down the run button isn't difficult, it's just time-consuming. The other 2 mentioned forms of artificial difficulty can be found in the alternate dream fights, where you fight the same bosses you already fought but with more health, more damage, and at 1.2 times speed. The only dream boss that's actually additive was introduced with the Grim Troop DLC, which, judging by the amount of community crossover, may have inspired several misdemeanors against humanity. Well, that That's disgusting. Nightmare King Grim is a faster, higher health, higher damage version of Grim, but now he also leaves a fire trail behind some of his abilities. The pacing felt good, the attacks were well telegraphed. This was actually my favorite boss fight of the entire game. My only real issue with the fight is that every attack has one reliable way to punish it. When you combine this with the fact that I have one weapon with one usable attack, it starts to dawn on you just how little player expression there is in this fight. One of the reasons this game received so much praise are the free DLCs baked into the game, the most content-rich being the final DLC, Godmaster, which introduced a boss rush. Interestingly, the boss rush mode increases the difficulty by voiding the upgrades you just spent the entire game acquiring, hilariously including the charms that you finally have enough slots to use. There are also individual boss fights, including entirely new bosses, each with 3 difficulties. The first difficulty is the base enemy, the second is the base enemy again, but with more health and more damage. And at this point you may have started to notice a theme with the developer's creative output. The third difficulty turns every point of damage into a one-shot, which is not only incredibly creative, but in a stroke of pure genius it takes what little build variety you had and removes every single one of the defensive options. While there's nothing inherently wrong with challenge runs, they tend to attract a particular kind of individual, one that I would prefer to avoid at all costs. European. As such, I am not the target audience for the Godmaster DLC. As a follow-up playthrough was seeming unlikely, I looked up the game's ending so I could pick the one that I wanted. The Dream No More ending requires 2 halves of a special charm. The first is found in a hole, and the second is found in the White Palace. While this initially sounds like a Genshin player's dream home, it is actually a series of tight platforming gauntlets. Why is the King's Palace filled with buzzsaws, spikes, and other miscellaneous death traps? I can't tell you the reasoning, because my summons were actively killing every NPC I tried to ask about it. But I suspect the actual reason was that someone felt as though they weren't doing their cancerous platforming due diligence, and were making up for lost time. As I neared the end of my playthrough, I couldn't help feeling philosophical, and so it's time I level with you. This is not the first time I've played this game. The first was years ago, right off the back of Dark Souls and the Blind Forest. I heard that Hollow Knight was like a mix of Dark Souls and Ori, so buying into the hype and high on my own expectations, I played through the entire game completely blind. I was sorely disappointed, to the point that I had no intention of making a video and deleted my footage. Then I realized my specs were too low to run Dragon's Dogma 2, and here we are. I went into this game fully expecting to have no fun and make a video about how this game is overrated garbage. Googled everything, used the map and geocharms from the very beginning, and I did all the content I missed in my first playthrough. And you know what? It wasn't that bad. At times, it was even pretty good. And yet, the greatest Metroidvania of all time seems like a bit of a stretch. And so, is Hollow Knight overrated? Yes, it has obvious flaws and isn't especially good at anything when compared to other games of the same genre. Is it garbage? No, Hollow Knight is fine. Some of the bosses are good, some of the characters are memorable, some of the music is on my Spotify, and yet I have no intention of playing this game ever again. You'll probably find it much more enjoyable if you temper your expectations, and for that, you're welcome. So if you're looking for a stunningly beautiful 2D Metroidvania with a focus on fun and fluid gameplay, go play Ori and the Will of the Wisps. If you're looking for a reasonably priced Metroidvania, designed by criminals with some decent boss fights, a lot of content, and that runs perfectly well on a common toaster, Hollow Knight is an excellent choice. It's $15, but you'll probably find it on sale for around $5. Thank you for watching and have a pleasant immediate existence.
Crush my cock with a rock I must. Maximum pain I must endure. Okay, here we go.